Good morning, everybody. We're just going to wait a few minutes while people start to arrive, and then we'll kick this off. Happy Purpose and Business Week. All right, so we'll just wait a few more minutes. It's only 10:01 here on the Pacific Coast. Wait while people arrive. We'll be holding questions at the end of the session, so if you want to pop those questions into the Q&A when you have them, that would be great. And we'll just wait a couple more minutes. I see people coming into the room. All right, well, we'll kick it off. It's going to be an exciting and short hour. Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon, and good evening to all of you who are joining us from outside of the Pacific Coast in British Columbia, Canada. My name is Tessa Vanderkop, and I'm the Social Purpose Strategist with the United Way BC Social Purpose Institute. I'd like to start by acknowledging and expressing gratitude to our hosts. Although we are meeting virtually, the lands that we are on today are on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. And particular acknowledgement and gratitude to the Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh that are Indigenous to the Pacific Northwest Coast, where I'm signing in from today. I would also like to express thanks and gratitude for the land where I live with my family, which is called Ravenwoods, an incredible Tsleil-Waututh development on the unceded territory of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. I'd like to welcome all of you here today for the third annual Purpose in Business Week. Purpose in Business Week is an annual celebration designed to generate national and hopefully international conversation and global awareness of the social purpose business movement. Held in November of each year, social purpose champions from all industries share their commitments to a social purpose, inspiring a shift towards a purpose-led economy. The United Way Social Purpose Institute was established in 2016 in response to UWBC business partners' increased desire to play a much greater role in creating positive social change with the United Way, in addition to and beyond traditional philanthropy. The social purpose is an initiative supporting United Way BC's mission of creating healthy, caring, inclusive communities. United Way BC is uniquely positioned to foster social purpose through our deep understanding of local community needs and social challenges. With SPI's success, United Way BC has developed strong relationships with leading local and global social purpose business experts, practitioners, and advisors. To date, we have worked with 50 businesses, over 200 business leaders across multiple sectors, taking them through a step-by-step process that supports their pivot to purpose. Which brings us to today's webinar. Kicking off Purpose in Business Week, we are absolutely thrilled and delighted to welcome Dr. Victoria Hurth. Victoria is an independent pracademic and fellow of University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. She has spent almost 30 years spanning both academia and companies to answer the question, how can we help organizations make decisions that align with long-term well-being for all, rather than undermine this pinnacle shared goal? Her work with global executives focuses on the central role of governance, along with purpose, marketing, leadership, and culture. Among other achievements, Victoria co-led the 5-year development of the first global ISO standard in governance of operations, was technical author for the first national standard in purpose-driven organizations, and advised the UN on the development of a methodology for SDG 12.6.1, sustainability reporting. And without further ado, I am delighted to introduce Victoria.
Thank you, Tessa. Great to be with you all. I'm seeing all the attendees into the room, and it's great to be part of your kickoff of Purpose in Business Week. What a wonderful occasion! While I'm talking now, I'm going to start sharing my screen. But just to say that I have long been a complete fan of what's been happening in Canada and the leadership that's been happening around purpose and driving the agenda forward. So it doesn't surprise me at all that you have a Purpose in Business Week. And I'm absolutely honoured and delighted to be kicking it off for you. So what I would like to do is to outline a series of bold propositions. I've been focusing for the last 2 decades at least on the precise question of how do we align organizational decision-making with a sustainable future. And I reached a point of saturation about 4 years ago where I realized that actually there was a quite clear answer sort of sitting there that had always been there in a way, but that was being obscured by other things. So in other words, it is complicated, but it's also, my proposition is it's more simple than we think that it is. That we don't lack energy or the tools, but we lack the clarity and unity and therefore confidence to move forwards. Now, up till recently, you might say, well, we had the luxury of time. We probably didn't, but it felt like that. I think now we're in a position where, for me, that level of saturation around what is unsustainability, what is sustainability, what is holding us back, what does the new market economy look like that can actually deliver the future that we want. That level of sort of saturation that I reached, where I saw that everyone are kind of saying the same things in slightly different ways, plus this urgent context that we're in, leads me to say, you know what, I'm just going to say exactly how I see that it is and say, if not this, what? If not, and it's not my theory, it's just me holding up a mirror, you might say, and making the provocation that if this is what we're saying, and this is the role of purpose as a pivotal to the transition to a sustainable future, then we should be shouting about that loudly and clearly, because that's not a niche topic. That is something that everybody in this world needs to have a sense of and be leading for. So that's where I'm starting from. And hence, this is a very big bird's eye perspective, you might say, of probably, I can imagine, all the amazing work that you're doing day to day. So I've got the easy bit because I just frame the amazing work that's happening to deliver within that frame. But hopefully by clarifying that further and beyond this kind of our niche group of people that get purpose, we can really start to accelerate at pace. So my key takeaways, that unsustainability is one massive governance failure. And that's good, because if we know it's a governance failure, it means we know that we can fix governance to fix it. And truly purpose-driven organizations, which embody that governance that's needed, fix that failure. And that ESG on its own, which is a part of, but just a part of this, it is unlikely to do that on its own. So we have to understand ESG in context of all of this. Purpose-driven organizations, this is my second point, require a paradigm shift. And we need to recognize the level of paradigm shift that's needed. And therefore, we need really high levels of clarity and unity to move from the status quo, which has huge amounts of power and clarity because it feels like the only thing that makes sense. So if we want to move somewhere else, we need to be very clear what we want to move to. And thirdly, that in a very practical sense, and I'm going to take you through some sort of key next steps in order to supercharge purpose from wherever it is that you're coming from, but that there is a catalyst moment that's coming into view, which is a There's going to be a proposed ISO in purpose-driven organizations at some point soon, and that really does give us the catalyst moment to really say, what does the world think is this governance system within a purpose-driven organization that can align all decisions with a sustainable future? And the idea that we can all be part of that and co-own and co-create it is really the very exciting thing. So I'm going to start, and these pieces of the puzzle are all really vital for laying the foundations for the communications we need to have globally about what's going on here. And I'm going to set out two sets of really foundational things we've got to get in place. Firstly, at the macro level, in terms of the level of the economy as a whole, and at the meso level, which is the organizational level. Now, the economy is an idea, it's a set of rules, but it's organizations that operationalize whatever the economy is supposed to be about. And that in turn unlocks that level of people and the lived experiences of people. So at the macro level, the first important point is that economy equals well-being equals sustainability, and that these are vital aspects to lay down. So economics 101. Economy is our organizing system for how we take resources, limited, scarce is the common phrase, but it's also unscarce, just resources, and allocate them and transform them in order to optimize well-being for society over the longer term. Now, the term well-being is an umbrella concept of, as I'll go into in a second, but it's variously understood also as welfare, flourishing, prosperity, but also within economic terms as things like welfare also and utility. So these are different but nested concepts that are ultimately anchored to the concept of well-being. So what do we mean by well-being? This is a definition from the British Standard in Social Impact, which is an amalgamation of lots of theories of well-being that have been developed over the years. Remembering well-being is the original discussion topic of philosophers. It is the pinnacle discussion. It is only the fact that we have outsourced the discussion of what is well-being to the market economy and fooled ourselves into thinking we don't need to discuss it anymore because the market will just somehow work that out for us, is where the problem is. So the definition here is that well-being is a state of being where current and future needs are met such that there is the capacity and opportunity to flourish. And then there are a set of notes there that explain that. So that leads then, so we've got this anchoring of the concept of needs to the concept of well-being. So one of the key ways in which well-being is met is through the satisfaction of fundamental universal human needs. Or if it's non-human life, the needs of particular ecosystems or whatever. But we're talking about fundamental requirements that lead to well-being. And of course, we know that the definition of sustainable development, and therefore the basis of sustainability, is development that meets the needs, in other words, well-being, of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So in effect, if you break this down and you analyze this, what this means is that the goal of a functioning, efficient, effective economy is the same as the goal of sustainable development. And you might say is also the closest we'll get to humanity's meta purpose if we ask enough whys, you know, the 5 why or however many. And that is that it is about well-being. In other words, the pinnacle of a good life. So it's not any old thing, it's well-being. And yes, we need to keep debating and really start to understand what that is. It's not just for some people, it's for everybody. Because if you're creating a consensus-based view and you did not know where you'd fit in that system, you would always say, well, it's for everyone. So that ethic of equity is actually quite profound. And then thirdly, not just now, but for the future, including future generations. So long-term well-being for all, or flourishing collectively into the future. We can call it whatever, we can use whatever words, but those concepts are essentially the accountability frame of sustainability. And it moves us massively forwards to going from, yeah, we all want a sustainable future. What do we mean by that? 100 million things. And lots of academics spending lots of time evaluating all of the myriad of ways in which people might understand the concept of sustainability, which in turn has been co-opted by the very system of business as usual that is the problem. But if we really stop and think about it, and we agree, and if not that, what? That the goal is long-term well-being for all, then we have the ability to strategize and build accountability and oversight and the basis of governance. So this is the first thing. That is, in other words, the ultimate expression of value, of what we really want, and what we are very much in danger of imminently losing unless we're very clear about it. At the meso level, what's really, I think, a key unlock is understanding that decision-making, culture, and governance are interconnected. So in any system, at any level, you have, in order to move forwards, especially move forwards together as a collective, you need two key things to provide core direction. And that is, you need to be clear about your goal. That could be making a cup of tea as you get out of bed, or it could be the purpose or the objective, if you're not purpose-driven, of an organization. So what is it that you're optimizing for at any given moment in time, or in terms of an organization's reason to exist? And that will be based, whether you like it or not, on your deep worldviews. In other words, what you really think is valuable in the world and how you think the world works. And therefore, that will be your initial stance to act in the world. But any goal will be operationalized within parameters, which means constraints or red lines or guardrails. And those parameters could be chosen parameters like risk, values, how you treat people. It could be things like how much carbon emissions you emit. It also could be structural issues that you can't do anything about, how much time you have or the stakeholders you have. So, but these form the basis of the kind of, you want to achieve this goal, but it's got to be within these parameters, either chosen or not chosen. The law is another very good example of a parameter. And that's really important because that's what builds the context for strategy. Because strategy is just, how do I fulfill a goal within a parameter at any level of the system? So we can't be talking about strategy unless we're really clear about our goal and our parameters. And from strategy, you basically get the investment, the action, the impact, and the behaviors. Now, what's important to understand is that governance of organizations, and this is the definition from ISO 37000, is a human-based system by which an organization is directed, overseen, and held accountable for achieving its defined purpose. So direction, oversight, and accountability are the core of governance. Direction is foundationally about the goal and the parameters, and then of course the vision and the mission, which elaborate that further, and the strategic objectives, which then strategy is created against. But at the core, goal and parameters. Oversight is, have we achieved the goal within the parameters? And accountability is, are we accountable to significant others for whether or not we have done that? So governance structures decision-making fundamentally. It then uses a lot of levers like KPIs, like incentives, in order to support the system in operationalizing that goal within those parameters. And if we think, like I say, culture is essentially worldviews expressed in decision-making over time that become routinized in sort of hardware, processes and structures, and software, ways of thinking and being, etc., then you can see how governance really sets the frame for culture. And the point being, we can't expect, therefore, an organization that's set up to govern for a certain goal within certain parameters, within, therefore, a certain culture, to have results in terms of sustainability that are really working completely against this. So I'll come back to this in a minute. But the point, and this is what I'm now going to unpick, is that unsustainability is a global governance failure. So there are misguided goals and misguided parameters at every level of the system, but starting at the global system, and therefore misguided strategy. And it does not protect and increase, therefore, what we truly value and what we are supposed to be using the economy to increase. There is no oversight of it. If there was, we might have corrected some of this, and there's no accountability. So I'm going to unpick that now, why it is that I say that in more detail in respect to everything I've just said. So if you're working within an organization, unsustainability feels a little bit like something like this. You're just getting a lot of data and science coming at you from colleagues, from training, from the news, or from your children. There's a lot of stakeholder and system pressure to change, and it's confusing, and it's coming in different directions with different language. And there's a lot of threat to reputation. So you know you've got to act, but it's really unclear sort of how to act, in what way. And it's a real sense that there's this moving agenda about what your social license to operate might look like, but not necessarily clear what therefore you should do other than everything all at once. And the proposition that I have is that a lot of time and effort is wasted because organizations are working within a particular logic, a particular solidified framework of governance that structures what they are able to do or not do, the business case or investment case they're able to make or not make. And unless they're aware of that, then all these nice ideas and pressure are only going to be able to result in certain actions and not others. And that we can boil that down into three key types of organizational logic. And by doing that, we're able to diagnose where we are as organizations, where our stakeholder organizations are, be realistic about ambition, and plot really clearly a path forward. So this is about naming the issues that are holding back change and naming the ways of governing and thinking and acting that can unlock change. So it's a kind of realism and a tool for diagnosis. This is Donella Meadows' iceberg model on the right, where she talked about different layers that a system shows itself. So you can look at events, patterns of behaviors, structures of systems, but ultimately you get down to mental models. And that means fundamentally your worldviews and what you really think is what you're here to do. And that's what these logics are about. So the first logic is logic one, business as usual CSR, and I'll explain why it's CSR in a second. This is an adapted Daly triangle, and Herman Daly was the original ecological economist. This model, he created this triangle to describe an unsustainable economy and what a sustainable economy looks like. And Donella Meadows, with her colleagues, looked at a whole range of potential options for describing what's going wrong and what is a sustainable economy, and decided that Herman Daly's model was the best and went on to adapt it. What I'm showing you now is a further adapted model that's taken it from that macro level that they worked at and bridged it to this meso level of organizational decision making, bringing in also things like the capitals model you'll see. And I had the great pleasure of talking with Herman Daly via email the week before he died. And he didn't tell me that he was very, very ill at that time, but we had a fantastic exchange where he was very supportive of this bridging to the operational level at the organization. And so this triangle really boils the ocean and allows us to see what otherwise is difficult to see. Now, his key insight was that we are stuck in the middle of the triangle. So we could think about that in these terms, building on what I talked about in terms of governance. So we have an objective, a fundamental objective of the economy as a whole, and also at the level of organizations that is focused on financial ends. So profit maximization, in other words. But that's not just for businesses. This is also for universities, governments, and otherwise. This financialization of the goal has seeped into all walks of life. And there's a reason for that I'll outline in a second. And so what that means is that capital, financial capital, is what we focus on as a reason to exist of what we're optimizing. It could also be self-interest, but it's usually expressed as financial self-interest, but it could just be self-interest. Charities and others often fall into that category. And then the parameters within which that goal is to be achieved, the main focus is stocks and flows of financial capital. And so it's achieve as much money as possibly as you can, as long as you are maintaining healthy stocks and flows of financial capital. And that's what we regulate for. If you think about all of the regulations around auditing, around disclosures, around directed duties, everything is really focused here. What that means is that the end goal of the economy, long-term well-being for all, in other words, sustainability, is out of sight, but it's also off limits. And this brings us to the essence of why do we have this focus on finance? It is based on a set of assumptions that are deeply flawed about how a market best works. And the idea is that customers, citizens, who we now call and think of as consumers, buy their well-being in the marketplace. And as long as I have enough information and enough competition and choice in the market, then the only thing that constrains their ability to increase well-being is their income. And so that then transfers to government, whom are held account to increasing the national accounts and increasing the money that's in the pockets of citizens so that they can increase their well-being. And over time, we have increased the marketization of life. So most things you need access to are really often only available in the marketplace. And the non-market ways of achieving that have kind of dwindled. That's one of the reasons we have a massive expanding economy. We assume that businesses are profit maximizing also in their self-interest, and that if they do that, there's a moralized perspective that if they are being profitable, then obviously they are producing things that are increasing people's well-being. Otherwise, they wouldn't be successful. So therefore, money equals success in providing well-being. We also have a view that companies can contribute to national accounts, which can contribute to money in people's pockets, and that those companies can increase jobs and pay people money because they are financially successful, which of course means that they have money in their pockets to buy their well-being in the marketplace. And so we have this hyper-financialized view of the world where the market economy only works if we're all financially self-interest. And so you can see why that's the bit that we've counted. But that means that we are not looking at primarily what is innovating well-being. Is that well-being being created or not? Or is it only being created for the short term or for a few people? No one is asking that question. It is an ungoverned question at the macro level and also at the company level. And what's also out of sight and off balance sheet are the foundational resources and value that underpin financial and manufactured capital, which are derived capitals. They're derived from foundational capital inputs into an organization of natural, human, and social, which are in turn underpinned by these big social and environmental systems like trust and social stability and mental health and stable climate and ecosystems that function and water that's clean to drink. These fundamental things that have been during the last 60, 70, 100 and more, you could go back a long, long way, expansion of this economic system. Those and the stakeholders that kind of gatekeep those are being routinely asset stripped. And that means that we have been liquidating that value. It's not being counted. It's not being on balance sheet. We're just counting what's in the middle. And it's called CSR because when faced with the fallout from that, because as the bottom of the triangle is becoming now so degraded that the whole system is about to collapse and our long-term well-being is under existential threat, which is the definition of unsustainability. Now that is happening, the pressure's coming onto the middle of the triangle. But when you're in the middle of the triangle and you're governed to short-term financial self-interest, the only way you can really act is if there's a case that it threatens your financial short-term self-interest or your survival. And so the investment case only works if there's pressure from something that threatens short-term self-interest. So if stakeholders push hard enough and powerful ones, then you can end up with all kinds of amazing sustainability action, like being top of some ESG rankings even, like having great volunteer programs, like having innovative new market products. But when you strip it back, the only thing that makes sense of all these various activities is short-term self-interest. And if the pressure goes away, then the activity goes away. Now, as people are starting to understand that actually what's at the bottom of the triangle is not, they should look beyond just the stakeholder pressure and say, what is going on at the bottom of the triangle here? You know, what is this scientific data? Maybe their son or daughter have come home from school and started talking about something. There are various reasons why we might start to become enlightened. But this then can move into a different logic if those who understand this issue start to change the governance system so that the objective is still financial self-interest, but that moves to long-term financial self-interest, which in effect means that you can create a business case to divert resources from just merely taking finance out and distributing it to members or shareholders, and instead say, no, we have to use that financial capital in order to protect the health of the foundational capitals, the stakeholders, and the social and environmental systems. And also there are things that we shouldn't be doing in the first place in order to protect that. Because if we don't protect that, we're not going to even have a business. We're certainly not going to be maximizing our financial self-interest. And so the language of long-termism, stakeholderism, ESG all comes in with this mindset. And we've seen that in the last 15 odd years, this language starting to come through. And this is where you get the SDGs, donor economics, ESG, planetary boundaries. They're all really an expression of the degradation at the bottom of the triangle, and therefore the threshold that we need to operate within in order to be okay. And that's both environmentally and socially. And at an organizational level, that's what kind of natural, human, and social capitals do we need in order to be able to function in the near term and moving forwards as a business? And what kind of stakeholder health do we need? But the key point is that the governance has changed. The parameters have moved from the middle of the triangle, the intermediate means they've moved down, and so you start to be able to act differently. Where we are at the moment, of course, is that only, we might call it immature enlightenment, where maybe one or two of the issues, like maybe climate change or maybe what we pay people, is starting to come onto the agenda. Maybe we're starting to measure some natural capital, but not maybe all our social capital. So there's movement, but it's very partial. The problem is that the real reality out there is moving very fast. And we need to get all of these issues on the table at once and innovate our business models to be within all these thresholds. So when we talk about what's material is not what you have most impact in. Everything is material if you're asset stripping something or other. Because if we all fail to protect an ecosystem threshold a little bit, that ecosystem still fails. So it's still material. It just means that maybe this has more bang for buck, but this still matters. So we need to get all the issues. There are at least 12 major issues. And what's happening, of course, at the moment with ESG legislation is we're doing one by one. So we're saying change your entire business model and product portfolio to fit within 1.5 degrees of warming. Oh, and now we're going to mention, of course, because biodiversity loss, it's more urgent than climate change, but it's not very easy for us to deal with. So we've taken a bit longer on it, but now we've got it sorted. So now you have to change your whole business model again. And that's what's happening. But if society could express what it really, I believe, wants to say, it would, and this is where we're going, and maybe much faster than people realize, we're saying you cannot operate unless you, as a business, as an organization, unless you can prove to us that you are not asset stripping social and environmental systems, that you are operating within these thresholds. But this is the enlightened. But what that means is that your reason to exist is still based on a view of how the market works, which is fundamentally flawed, and everything has to go through a financial interest business case. That is the case. So this is where purpose comes in. Because what purpose does is it broadens the organizational governance to the whole triangle. So the objective moves from financial self-interest to the end goal of the economy. And so a purpose-driven organization is not there to create long-term well-being for all people and planet on its own. An organization can only ever do a contribution to it. And an organization needs a very clear and specific reason to exist. And so a purpose-driven organization, and this is the British standard in purpose-driven organizations, defines that organizational purpose as, and I put organization here in brackets because you could apply it to yourself, a project, a brand, a department, anything. But it's an organization's reason to exist that is an optimal strategic contribution to the long-term well-being of all people and planet. In other words, to sustainability. So that is what then forms the objective at the end, but you obviously need enough stocks and flows of financial and manufactured capital to pay the bills, meet expectations of stakeholders, and invest in the purpose. And obviously, you also need to make sure you're delivering that purpose, no matter what it is, within all of these thresholds. And that's a non-negotiable. And what we're often getting is a kind of partial purpose where people maybe have a purpose, but it's not clear really if it's the optimal strategic contribution to long-term well-being for all people and planet. And we are not seeing an explicit delivery of that purpose within the parameters of healthy social and environmental systems, stakeholders and capitals. And so you could be achieving some kind of value for society at the top. Maybe it's not even optimal. And down at the bottom, asset stripping society in a different way. And again, we see a lot of charities falling into this, doing great work here and then operating in a way that's actually causing problems in a different place. So purpose, as defined in PAS 808, really describes the whole system and the whole system of governance behaviors that brings this about. And so how we might summarize this in total is in terms of where we've come from, where we are, and what the alternative is if we don't go there. Because when people say to me, oh, well, this is all a bit radical, and this is, how are we going to move there? And, business of business is making money. And I'm like, well, let's think about it then. Because at the moment we operate on an idea that financial goals automatically equal long-term well-being for all. So that's all we need to count. So we have a GDP economy, profit-driven organizations, and financially driven work and lives, which is toxic at all levels. And we're seeing the fallout for that. What is unfolding and what's happening really all over the place, if we look for it, is a shift to a well-being economy. And I think in Canada, you sometimes call that a purpose-led economy or purpose-driven economy. The well-being economy, I'll mention in a minute, has been a sort of long-standing concept which embodies this really. And there are, as I'll say in a second, governments that are working towards that. Purpose-driven organizations which operationalize the well-being economy. Otherwise, it's just a nice set of policy ideas. And then meaningful work, and that's part, by the way, that's government as an organization as well. And then meaningful work and lives, where work becomes a source of meaning and not something you compensate yourself for after you finished work, and where we harness the desire of humans to serve the good of others in order to supercharge the innovation we need. Now, if we don't make this shift really fast in terms of how the market economy is governed, then if we think about what happened in the pandemic and how easily when things get tough, we just hold our hands up and say, government, do it for us. How close are we to doing that? I'd say probably really pretty close. So for all those people who say, oh, no, but we need the market to look like this, it's like, we're not going to have a market. And can we really solve these problems if we don't have the freedom, efficiency, and democratizing effects of the market? And instead we put decisions into the hands of a few, or maybe AI. I mentioned about this in practice, what's happening. The Wellbeing Economy Alliance is really worth looking into. It's been around for about a decade. These are the countries that are signed up, including Canada, to operationalize and start shifting constitutions to be aligned with well-being of everyone in the long term as the goal. Here's an example, for example, of the national wellbeing indicators in Wales. They have also a Minister for Future Generations and a Wellbeing Economy Act and all kinds of things. And then, of course, we mentioned ISO 37000. That's another way where really we see the operationalizing of some of these things that's relevant at all levels of the system. And here are just to remind you, if you haven't seen it, the 11 principles, you can ignore the outer edge, that's some of the outcomes, but the 11 principles of good governance, including purpose being there right at the center. And then, of course, and I'm sorry I don't have all your logos. I'm sure there are many organizations here that represent purpose-driven organizations at whatever stage of that journey. And on the side, I put some here. And if you know anything about purpose-driven organizations, you know what that paradigm shift in thinking, where you transcend the idea of how a market works, you anchor to something that really does align with a sustainable future. How much innovation, how many new ways of doing things result, to the point that I'm not sure, unless we have that level of innovation. And let's face it, organizations and businesses are society's innovation nerve center. How are we going to solve the problems without these kinds of organizations pushing the boundaries of what's possible? Which is why purpose is absolutely front and center in the middle of the revolution to a sustainable world. And on the right here, you can see some of the legal change. There's a report that's out between DLA Piper and CISL that I was involved with that plots some of that shift in the legal agenda. It's slow, and at the moment it's very transition. It's sort of hybrid. Oh yeah, you have profit maximization. Now we'll add purpose in. But what we are moving towards is a place where organizations set their purpose, they defend why that is an optimal contribution to long-term well-being for all people and planet. They declare it publicly. Maybe we have juries that judge whether or not that is good enough. And they then they commit to the parameters to deliver that within. They expose their strategy and how they're going to deliver that strategy, and then they're held to account for it publicly. And directors become beholden to the beneficiaries, which is everyone forever, and then specifically the beneficiaries that are contained in the purpose, while looking after all the other stakeholders that actually help to deliver it. So different types of stakeholders, and we can go into that in more detail. I saw there was a question in the chat about the economics of mutuality and the difference with this, and I think that bring out some of that perhaps. Yeah, so PAS 808 talks about these different layers of stakeholders as well. Again, you'll probably have loads of great examples of purpose-driven organizations. There's a paper on the right that's freely available. That's some illustrative examples of the principles of purposeful business that came out of the British Academy work. And then this is an example. Now, I don't know where Old Mutual are on this at the moment, and I believe that maybe they're not in the same place, but it still remains a fantastic example of the sorts of innovation that happens when a purpose is changed. So Old Mutual's purpose was to provide the best investment and retirement solutions in the market in the most flexible manner with unparalleled service for our customers at great value. I mean, that's a classic non-purpose statement, which is essentially how we're going to offer great goods and services. Who isn't? They went through a real process of trying to understand the role that they could play in society, speaking to stakeholders in a very detailed way and trying to understand what drove their well-being. And they ended up as to enable positive futures. Now, that's a very high-level statement and very generic. And what matters is the elaboration that comes under it, as you all know, which is really, this is the purpose strapline, you might say, whereas the purpose statement really draws everything out. What's most interesting, though, is how that did relate to strategy. So within 12 months, 90% of their UK and European insurance books were closed to new business and were replaced by new products aligned with the purpose and the vision to achieve it. So essentially, they really did change the portfolio in relation to the purpose. This is really interesting. This was a 2020 survey by KPMG of 1,300 CEOs, and it really shows how at least the idea, the intent, is shifting within CEOs. This asks CEOs, what's the overall objective of the organization? And the questions that KPMG asked matched the three logics almost entirely. So the first one was deliver economic returns to shareholders. That was actually only 11% of CEOs thought that was their objective. Embed purpose into everything that we do. That was to create long-term value. In other words, do purpose to make long-term money. In other words, enlighten self-interest. That was 69%, but 21% were to advance public interest and improve society. So maybe not in realizing the intent, but at some level it's there. I'm going to finish in like 30 seconds, but just to say, which I'm sure you already know, that of course, what purpose really does is enable purpose at the human level. And we know from Daniel Pink's work and many others that the fundamental motivation that we have, if allowed to be that way and to be fully human, is to act in the service of the good of the other, because that's the most powerful way that we feel that our life is worthwhile. Think of the warm glow when you open the door or pick up a pencil even for somebody. It's that sense of meaning. And what purpose does is, of course, unleash that by not saying, come and help us. We're going to try and make as much money for ourselves as possible, but come and join us because we're going to solve this problem, which is going to underpin our collective well-being that matters to all of us. So let's do this together. It's a fundamental difference in how you can engage stakeholders. And of course, we know it brings authenticity, agility, stakeholder support and productivity, a whole range of things that naturally sort of result from if done well. So I'll finish on this. Steps forward. I'd say read PAS 808 and baseline yourself against it. Anglian Water is one of the organizations that helps create a PAS 808. They have audited themselves. They've got their independent auditors to do the same separately. They've compared notes, and they're going to be publishing that online. So, and that is also in order to prepare for the ISO, because PAS 808 is likely to be that just the starting point of the conversation. So familiarizing yourself with PAS 808 puts yourself in a good position for that. Assess your worldviews and be realistic about where you are in your ambitions. So PAS 808, that's the British standard in purpose-driven organizations, is called Worldviews, Principles and Behaviors. And I think it might be the first standard that starts with worldviews, which are what underpin your principles. So in there at the beginning are a set of worldviews you're likely to hold if you're purpose-driven. If you are thinking of becoming purpose-driven, or you are purpose-driven but wondering why it's not maybe going as fast as you would like, then assessing those worldviews might, especially if key decision makers or the culture as a whole, will be really, really useful. Very significantly important as well, of course, is mapping your stakeholder constellation, because you can have the intent to be purpose-driven, but realizing that intent is a different thing. And we must judge organizations on their ability and transparency to bridge that gap, because it doesn't mean you're purpose washing just because you're in a really tough implementation context. So being really realistic, because how far you can change is not just about your internal culture, which matters, but it's the cultures of the organizations that you sit with. And assessing their worldviews, for example, is very helpful. And then, of course, connecting with others, because you can recognize you need to change parts of your stakeholder system, but you can't do it on your own. So connecting with others. And then, of course, get involved with the potential new ISO. It hasn't been put forward yet for vote. It should be soon. And that is no less than, I think, our catalyst moment to unite the energy, create the clarity, and therefore the accountability to move forward and enable purpose to really become the operationalizing of the sustainable future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victoria. We have some questions that were in the chat. I think you saw one of them, which was, how does purpose and business overlap with the economics of mutuality?
So I know some of the people involved in the economics of mutuality, but I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert in what they do. What I understand is that it overlaps very strongly with stakeholderism and stakeholder perspectives. There are two different ways of understanding, or two major ways of understanding stakeholderism. The one is, and this is how it's used to pull down purpose, is that it is a reason to exist, the pinnacle innovative focus, which is balancing stakeholder values for everyone. And then there's instrumental stakeholderism, which is the second type, which is we serve our stakeholders so we can serve ourselves. My sense is that the economics of mutuality is maybe more in the first camp and is more in that sort of, you might say, shared value space. But I also realize that I do not know enough, and I'm probably completely misrepresenting what they do. So that's one to be discussed. By the way, just to say, at the end of my presentation, there are some resources and links to further information. All this stuff's written down in detail, so you'll get those.
I just want to share a quick comment in the chat, which is magnificent work and presentation. So,
oh, that's very kind. Thank you.
Yeah. And so another question that was in the chat was that, do you see a role for changing legislation to make companies be purpose-driven? Whereas, for example, the Companies Act in the UK forces directors to put financial interests first. And I would be interested in an answer to that question. And from your perspective, what do you see in different markets? And do you have a sense of that?
Yeah. So I'm just sorry. Sorry, I was observing the thing. Could you repeat the question? I've got it in my head. I just need the link to it.
Oh yeah. I'll just put I'll just drop it into the chat here for you.
Sorry, what was in my head was also just when I was thinking about the economics of mutuality, what I didn't therefore say is that purpose, and this is quite an important point in relation to stakeholderism, people pull down purpose because they say, well, you can't balance value for all stakeholders. And actually, I would agree with them. I think a purpose that is do everything for everyone all at once. And then my question would be based on what their immediate demands, their fundamental needs, their objective or their subjective perspective. So I think getting stakeholders involved is really critical, but understanding, are they the point of your reason to exist? Is really everyone who you're trying to optimize for? Because optimizing for everyone is really, really tough. And I'd love to see how you operationalize that. Or is it that you exist for a certain purpose, but you need your stakeholders to be healthy to support you to do that? And you don't want to be asset stripping them, so you need them in the room. And I think these are very blurry conversations at the moment. We need to be much clearer. So sorry, that other question.
No, that's okay. I think that was a really important point. So do you see a role for changing legislation?
Yes, that's all I needed to know, because I heard the rest. I just then lost thread of it. Sorry, it's nearly 7 o'clock in the evening here, so I'm not as fresh as
No
the rest of you in
worries.
Canada. So yes, of course, and yes, you talked about the bit that the act in the UK, which actually has moved towards Logic 2 in its last iteration, and then others are now with the Better Business Act trying to move towards the purpose logic. Yes, absolutely. We need everything everywhere all at once, of course. And legislation is an expression of minimum standards. I think at the moment, purpose is in the sort of innovative groundbreaking area. But as I said in that sort of dartboard diagram that myself and my colleague Lorenzo Firamonti have been working on, if we don't move there fast, we're not going to have the luxury of market economy. We can't move there fast unless legislation and regulation is pulling in the same direction and supporting that to happen. And if we switch the question that I often get asked, well, we don't have many purpose-driven organizations, do we? Or how many do we have? As if therefore that means that it's a kind of like a nice idea. If we were to think, how many purpose-driven organizations would we have if we didn't have legislation and regulations pulling against it, stopping it, or organizations taking toxic finance because when they start growing, that's all that's available? And we would probably have an absolute mass of purpose-driven organizations. So no, I think ultimately that is where we're going. We are going to a situation where you cannot exist. Firstly, it will be you cannot exist if you do harm. And that's what all the EU regulation and everything is starting to try to say. Operate within thresholds, do no harm. But then I think it will quickly move to, actually, you need to exist for a reason that actually makes sense. Because if we're going to give you the right to even touch our scarce resources, you've got to show us you're going to do something useful. Because otherwise you're taking resources and working with them that other people could do something better for. And that's the idealistic where we would get. Because otherwise, how will we solve these problems unless we've got organizations all out trying to innovate for them?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think when I look at your triangle that you were talking about today, and we're really looking at a seismic shift away from business as usual, right? And so probably that legislative piece, I think, is probably one of the big levers I think that ultimately will have to be pulled.
But just to remind us that, so just briefly to remind us that legislation tends to be what happens at the end of the pipe when we have enough of a critical mass of a norm to put it into legislation. So everything that's being done now is critical for that norm to be, okay, it's safe to do this now because it's become acceptable.
And so there's another question, which is, how can educational systems shift to help support this concept of a purpose-driven economy? How many kids and students today are learning about the purpose economy? Are you able to share any insights on that?
Well, I actually was co-editor of a special issue on repurposing universities for sustainable human progress. We had an editorial. We had lots of articles in that, and you can get that freely available online. It was about 3 years ago. And within that, myself and my colleague Ian Stewart wrote a paper on repurposing universities, the path to purpose. And that takes the triangle and then applies that to universities and describes how universities are really stuck in the middle of the triangle. So that's, I think, for universities, but also the point being, this is for all organizations, including schools, including universities, including governments. So we can take that very same thing of the triangle, that's all in a report called the Unleashing the Sustainable Business, the basis of that. We can take PAS 808 and we can use that to say, to what extent are our educational systems purpose-driven? Otherwise, what we're doing is what we're often doing is trying to, let's get this in the curriculum, let's get that in the curriculum. All we're doing is sort of plugging holes, but the overall is still pointing towards business as usual. That might have been okay 20, 30 years ago. We don't have time for that now. We've got to get to the root of the governance system and how organizational decisions are made. That's really my overarching point.
So I think we have time for one quick question before we close. And this is it. Most companies that have pursued B Corp certification are purpose-driven, and some of those companies may have used mission or purpose language. With the new draft B Corp standards explicitly moving towards defining and implementing a purpose, how do you see B Corp contributing and leading as a part of the wider purpose movement? Good question.
Yeah, great question. So I don't think they've been released yet, the new criteria. I was involved in the contribution to the purpose and governance criteria. How much of that is reflected, I don't know. And B Lab were involved in the development of PAS 808. So there's a tie-up there. The way that I always describe, I mean, if the new B Corp criteria come out and they are a replica of PAS 808 or better than PAS 808, then brilliant. That would be wonderful. It wouldn't necessarily still resolve the co-ownership and the multi-stakeholder accountability and assurance type things, but that's another question. I think what B Corp does is absolutely amazing, and they've shifted the dial so much. But I would consider them an on-ramp, and that's what I'm imagining we'll get out of the next iteration. Hopefully a faster on-ramp and a closer and a clearer on-ramp. But nonetheless, there are lots of on-ramps to the destination. But until PAS 808 and what will be the ISO, because what we really need is like globally co-owned. No one owns it, therefore we all own it. It's all of ours. And then we make it better. Once we've got that, we've got a sense of what the destination is. And that's really, really important so that we have clarity that you might be doing B Corp or you might be doing fair trade or you might be doing something over there. And they're all ways of moving towards here. So let's get that clear.
That's great. Thank you. I think that's all the time we have for questions today. It's 7 o'clock in the UK. You probably are dying to move off and have a glass of wine or some dinner. I just want to thank all of you, honestly, for taking the time to join, I think, in this important conversation with Victoria. And I want to thank Victoria, honestly, for your continued groundbreaking work and thought leadership, supporting business transition to purpose. I really think that the future looks brighter, I think, for all of us, with Victoria and many of you here today doing this important work. I think, as you say, there's a lot of on-ramps. I think we are in that critical juncture. And I think that there's a lot that can be done. And really, a lot of it is connecting these dots and these levers. So please continue to join in the conversation this week. Hashtag Purpose in Business Week. We'd love to hear from you. We have other events happening this week, including the Purpose Economy, Reshaping the Metrics of Business Success, hosted by CPEP and Globe and Mail. And then on November 24th, we'll have the opportunity to hear from some incredible businesses that have come through the Social Purpose Institute programs, rapid fire insights from social purpose business leaders. And thanks all of you for joining us. And we'll see you on the Purpose Trail. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much.